The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. Book 2, The Falcon, 9. I had been right in thinking that the sea was near. The forest ended in it, a stretch of sea so enclosed that at first I thought it was a big lake, until I smelled the salt, and saw, on the narrow shingle, the dark slime of seaweeds. The forest finished abruptly, with a high bank where exposed roots showed through the clay, which the tides had gnawed away year after year at the land's end. The narrow strand was mainly of pebbles, but here and there bars of pale sand showed, and greyish, glimmering fans spreading fern-like between them, where shallow water ran seawards. The bay was very quiet, almost as if the frost of the past weeks had held it icebound. Then a pale line under the darkness. You could see the gap between the far headlands where the wide sea whitened. To the right, the south, the black forest climbed to a ridge, while to the north, where the land was gentler, the big trees gave shelter. A perfect harbour, you would have thought, till you saw how shallow it was, how at low tide the shapes of rocks and boulders stuck black out of the water, shiny in the starlight with weed. In the middle of the bay, so centred that at first I thought it must be man-made, was an island. What must rather be an island at high tide, but was now a peninsula, an oval of land joined to the shore by a rough causeway of stones, certainly man-made, which ran out like a naval cord to join to the shingle. In the nearest of the shallow harbours made by the causeway, and shone a few small boats, and the shore a few small boats, coracles, I thought, lay beached like seals. Here, low beside the bay, there was mist again, hanging here and there among the boughs like fishing nets hung out to dry. On the water's surface it floated in patches, spreading slowly till it curdled and thinned, and then wisped away to nothing, only to thicken again elsewhere. The smoke slowly across the water. It lay round the base of the island so densely that this seemed to float on cloud, and the stars that hung above reflected a grey light from the mist that showed me the island clearly. This was egg-shaped rather than oval, narrow at the causeway end and widening toward the far end, where a small hill, as regular in shape as a beehive, stood up out of the flat ground. Round the base of this hillock stood a circle of the standing stones, a circle broken only at the point facing me, where a wide gap made a gateway from which an avenue of the stones marched double, like a colonnade, straight down to the causeway. There was neither sound nor movement. If it had not been for the dim shapes of the beached boats, I would have thought that the shriek, the chanting, were figments of a dream. I stood just inside the edge of the forest, with my left arm round a young ash tree, and the weight of my right foot watching with eyes so completely adjusted to the dark of the forest that the mist-illuminated island seemed as light as day. At the foot of the hill, directly at the end of the central avenue, a torch flared suddenly. It lit, momentarily, an opening low in the face of the hill, and clearly in front of this the torch-bearer, a figure in a white robe. I saw then what it was I had taken to be banks of mist in the shadow, to be the cromlech. I saw then that what I had taken to be banks of mist in the shadow of the cromlechs were groups of motionless figures, also robed in white. As the torch lifted, I heard the chanting begin again, very softly and with a loose and wandering rhythm that was strange to me. Then the torch and its bearer slowly sank earthwards, and I realized that the doorway was a sunken one, and he was descending a flight of steps into the heart of the hill. The others crowded after him, groups clotting, coalescing round the doorway, then vanishing like smoke, being sucked into an oven door. The chanting still went on, but so faint and muffled that it sounded no more than the humming of bees in a winter hive. No tune came through, only the rhythm which sank to a mere throb in the air, a pulse of sound, felt rather than heard, which little by little tightened and quickened till it beat fast and hard, and my blood with it. Suddenly it stopped. There was a pause of dead stillness, but a stillness so charged that I felt my throat knot and swell with tension. I found I had left the trees and stood clear on the turf above the bank, my injury forgotten, my feet planted apart, flat and squarely on the ground, as if my body were rooted through them and straining to pull life from the earth, as a tree pulls sap. And, like the shoot of a tree growing and thrusting, the excitement in me grew and swelled, beating through somehow from the depths of the island and along the naval cord of the causeway, bursting up through flesh and spirit, so that when the cry came at length, it was as if it had burst from my own body. A different cry this time, thin and edged, which might have meant anything, triumph or surrender or pain, a death cry this time, not from the victim, but from the killer. And after it, silence. The night was fixed and still. The island was a closed hive sealed over whatever crawled and hummed within. Then the leader, I assumed it was he, though this time the torch was out, appeared suddenly like a ghost in the doorway and mounted the steps. The rest came behind, moving not as people move in a procession, but slowly and smoothly in a group, breaking and forming, contained in pattern like a dance, till once more they stood parted into two ranks beside the cromlechs. Again complete stillness. Then the leader raised his arms as if at a signal, white and shining like a knife blade. The edge of the moon showed over the hill. The leader cried out, and this, the third cry, was unmistakably a call of triumphant greeting, and he stretched his arms high above his head as if offering up what he thought he held between his hands. The crowd answered him, chant and counter-chant. Then as the moon lifted clear of the hill, the priest lowered his arms and turned. What he had offered to the goddess he now offered to the worshippers. The crowd closed in. I had been so intent on the ceremony at the center of the island that I now watched the shore, or realized that the mist, that I had not watched the shore, or realized that the mist, creeping higher, was now blurring the avenue itself. My eyes, straining through the dark, saw the white shapes of the people as part of the mist that clotted, strayed, and eddied here and there in knots of white. Presently I became aware of this. Presently I became aware that this, in fact, was what was happening. The crowd was breaking apart, and the people in twos and threes were passing silently down the avenue, in and out of the barred shadows which the rising moon painted between the stones. They were making for the boats. I had no idea how long it had all taken, but as I came to myself I found that I was stiff, and where I had allowed my cloak to fall away, I was soaked with the mist. I shook myself like a dog, backing again into the shelter of the trees. Excitement had spilled out of me, spirit as well as body, in a warm gush down my thighs, and I felt empty and ashamed. Dimly I knew that this was something different. This had not been the force I had learnt to receive and foster, nor was this spilled-out sensation the aftermath of power. That had left me light and free, and keen as a cutting blade. Now I felt empty as a licked pot, still sticky and smelling with what it had held. I bent, stiff-sinewed, to pull a swatch of wet and pallid grass, and cleaned myself, scrubbing my hands, and scooping mist drops off the turf to wash my face. The water smelt of leaves and of the wet air itself, and made me think of Galapus and the holy well and the long cup of horn. I dried my hands on the inside of my cloak, drew it about me, and went back to my station by the ash tree. The bay was dotted with the retreating coracles. The island had emptied, all but one tall white figure, who came straight down from the center of the avenue. The mist cloaked, revealed, and cloaked him again. He was not making for a boat. He seemed to be heading straight for the causeway. But as he reached the end of the avenue, he paused in the shadow of the final stone and vanished. I waited, feeling little except weariness and a longing for a drink of clear water, and the familiarity of my warm and quiet room. There was no magic in the air. The night was as flat as old sour wine. In a moment, sure enough, I saw him emerge into the moonlight of the causeway. He was clad now in a dark robe. All he had done was drop his white robe off. He carried it over his arm. The last of the boats was a speck dwindling in the darkness. The solitary man came quickly across the causeway. I stepped out from under the trees and down onto the shingle to meet him. And that is the end of chapter 9.